think we'll be starting up here any minute. I think we're also waiting for Frank. So, yeah, in the absence of like, how many people here have been to a composer panel at MAGFest before? A lot. Okay, so in the past, Josh Welchel will like do like moderation, and he'll like have a number of questions that he'll ask the panel about their work and their experience, so that y'all can get blessed with some amazing knowledge. And I think I'm gonna sort of volunteer to act on his behalf. I've talked here a lot, and there are definitely people like Lena and Chris that have not had the opportunity to do so. And we've got folks like Will that is, of course, exploding and doing some incredibly amazing things. So between that, I think like I'll throw some questions out, and then we will also then, once we're past that, I guess that point, we'll open things up to questions from the audience. Does that sound like a cool format for everybody? Yep, right on. Cool. Okay. Yeah, we're 7 minutes in, and when Frank gets here, Lord knows he's probably really working hard on the performance for the Command and Conquer Tiberian Suns tonight, which I hope you all can make at 10:30 on the main stage. So we'll kick things off. We're going to start with just introductions. My name is, and we'll go down the line. My name is Alexander Brandon. I've been fortunate enough to write scores starting with Tyrion for Epic Mega Games way back in the day, moving on from then to games like Unreal Tournament, Deus Ex, and more recently like independent titles like Dust and Elysian Tale. And I've audio directed quite a bit for companies like Midway and Obsidian. Just at the moment, I'm working with In Exile Entertainment on Wasteland 3 and with Other Side Entertainment on System Shock 3. So I get to go back to the good old days of Deus Ex stuff and write some music and do some really cool audio design for them. I also do voiceover. I've been on games like Skyrim and DC Universe Online. There's a few characters that you might know me as. So yeah, I'm kind of all over the map there. But the first thing I ever did was write music for games. So, and that's why we're all here today. So with that in mind, I'll pass it over to Will.
Hey everyone, I'm Will Roger. I'm also a composer. I started off at LucasArts doing a bunch of Star Wars games and musical direction on the Monkey Island special editions. And then I went freelance and I did Lara Croft Temple of Osiris, Guild Wars 2, Path of Fire, and Call of Duty World War II. And I'm currently, and Destiny 2 Forsaken, and I'm currently doing the score to Mortal Kombat 11.
Hi, hello. Is this, no? Hello. I'll switch out. Swap. Hello. Okay, cool, this one's working. I'm Lena Rain. I most recently did the score to Celeste. You may have heard of it. And I kind of got my start, amusingly enough, writing music for Guild Wars 2, co-wrote the post-release content, and then also co-wrote the score for Heart of Thorns, so one expansion before Will. And then I also did a game called Hack Mud, which is a little niche hacking game, and Dead State, a couple other things. And I'm currently working on getting a solo album out in the first couple months of this year, so that'll be coming out soon, and then a bunch of other things which have not been announced. So, yeah.
Hey, my name's Christopher Madigan. I did the score for Cuphead. My main background is actually in orchestral percussion, so Cuphead was my first game. I'm currently working on the DLC, though, for Cuphead. And then another unnamed project, which cannot be discussed.
Cool. Awesome. Well, great. Yeah, for a second, I was thinking of how many people have seen the Comedian trailer with Jerry Seinfeld, where you got this guy pushing a button in the VO booth with the guy that's an announcer going, "In a world where laughter was king." No, in a world, Jack. But anyway, at the beginning it goes, whoa, feedback. So hopefully we won't have too much of that. I'll start with a question that anybody can just we'll start sort of in the generic realm or general realm before we sort of dive into more specifics. But it's just game music has gone from something that, obviously we have the limitations of 8-bit. We have our, the things technologically that obviously has led to an incredible inspiration for a huge amount of people. This conference obviously demonstrates some of that. But what, in terms of writing and approaching projects, for game music, like say the first thing that goes through your head, say on whatever latest project you've been on, like do you have like okay, here's how I'm going to make things different, or here's the uniqueness, or is it that open-ended set of options that creates the challenge for you? What would you say the biggest thing that goes through your head as far as the challenge of creating the score that you're going to create?
Yeah, I guess for me, like I've worked in a bunch of different like sort of mediums for music. Like, Celeste was a lot of synths and piano, and then I also did, Guild Wars, which had, full orchestra. And I think a lot of it, because there's, less of a limitation in terms of like what kinds of instruments you can use, I tend to force limitations upon myself and kind of go with what makes sense to the project, right? And so there's obviously like budgetary restrictions. So like, if you only have, the money to just work out of your apartment, like I did for Celeste, like you make certain choices. If you have the budget of a AAA studio and can, hire an orchestra and choir and, percussionists and all sorts of things, like you go with those options if you have them, if it makes sense for the project. But it really comes down to kind of speccing it, from the outset of looking what makes sense for the game and sort of making a sort of palette to choose from, and then sort of going from there and working to the strengths of the whole package of the game.
I always like to start every project by basically just having a notepad file or like a Trello board or whatever, where I just list all the random ideas, most of which are terrible ideas, but concepts that I can keep referring to and refining as the score goes on. And the point of that is I always want to finish a score and be able to say, I've done at least 2 things that I haven't heard before in a game score. So for example, on Call of Duty World War II, we wanted to have it sound like a modern reinterpretation of historical fiction. So we didn't want to have any like of the big pounding Hans Zimmer synthesizers that you'd normally get in a Call of Duty game, but instead it had to have that power while still feeling historical. And so I said, okay, well maybe instead of synthesizers and big epic percussion, why don't we use a string quartet and have them play very rhythmically and very sort of busy, almost percussive type passages. And I did a lot with musical sound design as well, taking a bunch of the sound effects from the game, things like World War II artillery and vehicles, and using that almost like as a replacement for the percussion section of the orchestra, doing a lot of different filtering and different kinds of sound design to it so that it would fit in that world, but sort of bridge the gap between the music and the sound effects.
Cool. Chris,
Yeah,
any ideas?
Talking about limitations, not so much technological limitations, but compositional limitations. Like, for me, with Cuphead, it was really easy in a sense because we knew exactly what style we were going for, so that's like a built-in limitation. So it sort of narrows your focus, which sounds like it's going to make things more difficult, but it actually makes things a lot easier because it condenses the amount of ideas that you're able to do. I just wrote something for the DLC for Chalice, the new character, and I had my own limitations that I put on it because I kind of knew where she was coming from. Like, there's actually like a bit of backstory in the game, and so I had this tune worked out. I think it's actually a pretty good tune, and Chad, the head developer, vetoed it because he's like, it's not going to work for her at all, but he still hasn't really. There's been no definition yet as to what exactly he's looking for. So now I'm kind of, I'm trying to come up with new ideas, and there's nothing that's been sort of reined in. So I can do whatever I want to write for her, and I can't think of anything because there's nothing there to sort of define. And then like it'll come with time as him and I have more back and forth on it too. But without any sort of limitations, like, when you can do anything you want, you have like this sort of option paralysis of, so I don't really have like the technological, I was just writing for actual musicians, not for any sort of MIDI programming or anything. But speaking to it from a compositional standpoint, yeah, like having those kind of limitations is super useful. So if you can give yourself parameters to write within, it's going to make it a lot easier to get started.
May I ask a question, actually? This is almost for everyone. Like, do you ever come into soundtracks with almost like pre-intentions? Like maybe there's some musical element that just fascinated you that particular year, and you try to like work it into your music, or is it always just like whatever the project demands, you stick to that?
Yeah, no, I think I definitely. Oh, hello. Yeah, I think I definitely like. I come into that sometimes with like, one of my just kind of like guilty pleasures with like working on games that have like big climactic boss battles is like I always, not always, but like so far for 2 projects, like I use the Vocalisa Bulgarian Women's Choir thing because I'm a huge like Xenogears nerd, and so like I was bringing that just kind of like my own just like. I know that I've been doing this style in this game up to this point, but now I want to bring in this thing that just like sparks an interest with me and just kind of, bring in a new layer into sort of the final boss battle just because, I felt like doing that.
That's awesome. And Chris, I think you mentioned you integrated like a tap dancing motif in one of the pieces because you had seen something like that and you wanted it.
Yeah, I mean, for Cuphead, I just did like the amount of. It was about a 4-year composition process, but probably at least half of that was literally just studying and listening to stuff from that era to sort of get the vibe. And so anything that came up, like there was a bunch of tap dance videos, so there was just like, we should probably have, it's like, you're sort of like scrounging for ideas too, so that's a good idea maybe to do something to take that idea and integrate it in something. So there's a few areas we didn't use, like I'm hoping to use some more a Hot Club of France kind of stuff in the DLC, like because we didn't do any of that, like Django Reinhardt kind of vibe. So not guaranteed, but there might be some of that in the, that's kind of just. Tap Dancer was one. The theremin was another that actually was invented in I think the late 20s. So it's like, we got to put that in. So yeah.
And Alex, I remember like on Deus Ex, you had this really unique. It was like synthesis, but it had this like dirt to it. I was wondering, could you talk about some of the inspiration that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the dirt was actually because we were forced to use 8-bit samples in certain cases, in order to keep the file size a certain. Well, that was but no, there was some intentional stuff that because the nature of the story did speak a lot to. There's all kinds of things going on behind the scenes that are just very controlling the human population, and if any of I don't know if any of you or anybody here has seen the Bob and Threadbare playthrough of Deus Ex. If you haven't, it's one of those playthroughs that is not Markiplier. Excuse me. I'm sorry, my kids watch him and love this guy, and he makes however many billions of dollars or anything.
Wait,
but
there's other Let's Players besides?
Yeah, exactly. Bob and Threadbare starts each episode of the Let's Play with Deus Ex with diving deep into like what is the Illuminati and like what's the actual world history that went into Sheldon Picotti's writing and the story. And I got far more learning than I ever did working on the actual game because of that. But that was instilled a little bit early on, and so taking samples from my Chord Trinity or finding samples wherever I could, and then combining them. It started with Unreal, really. Like so, the inspiration that we had was I hesitate to use the word synthwave because that's sort of the word that people use now. But like back then, I was like, hey, I've got this really cool synth sound that's plucky, percussive, or whatever, and I can echo it, and it can sound really cool, and let's try it. And like the designers like freaked out because it hadn't really been done that much. I don't mean to like sound all ego or whatever, but like there was a unique factor to that really helped. So, but I'd say the roughness was like half technological limitations and half deliberate. This is the inspiration we get from the game itself.
That's cool.
Yeah. So. What you were, based on the questions that you were asking and talking about limitations, and the previous question you had, which was, do you take something that you've heard recently and do you incorporate that into the work that you have? It made me think of the idea that it's okay to just be comfortable with the context of your own experience when it comes to thinking of ideas for inspiration, right? Because part of my emotional side of my relationship with music is like, and I keep telling you about this, the song that you wrote for Songs for the Cure. Like if you haven't heard Songs for the Cure, it's a 3-part series. Josh Welchel, organized the whole thing, and it was, for, helping with cancer research. But Will's track just was sorry. I was just like, okay, I'm just going to give up. It was really, really, really good. But like there was such a fresh take on so many different concepts, compositionally, instrumentally, and you were just like, oh, well, I just did this, and we put some people together, and we did that. But like there was also a sort of like, oh, but I need to go and I need to find these inspirations, and why didn't I do this, and that sort of thing, because like that's where our emotions can go when we hear something that's inspirational. We can be inspired and it can drive us forward, but sometimes there's also this, why didn't I do that, right?
Yeah.
So utilizing that, or it's taking a step back from that and saying like, you know what? Let me focus on the positive aspect of this inspiration and just be like, I'm just sort of going to stay in my wheelhouse in that way, but also like just in a way that I can not stress myself out with finding the new sources, like, and one of which was like on Avon Colony, it was a strategy game that I worked on. I blatantly used like Zimmer organs from Interstellar. I was like, like he used organs in this thing. Let me see if this works. Hey, it sounds pretty darn good. Yes, it's a Zimmer technique, and I'm going to say it's a Zimmer. I don't think Zimmer's a dirty word when it comes to like referencing certain techniques, except maybe the boom or whatever it is, right? So with all that in mind, like, I'm going to throw this out there. Have there been, like, can you think of specific cases in which, like, you'll release a score, but then, like, another score will come out that year that you think, it would have been so great if I could have just done this or that, or just gone that extra step? Like, any specific cases you can think of?
I mean, one of the banes of my existence is, remember when I said, I like to do, like, 2 different things that hasn't been done? When I'm still working on a score and then some other thing comes out and then they do the exact thing, like somehow they thought of that same thing, and I'm just like, dang. Okay, back to the drawing board, back to Trello. These things happen, there's only a finite amount of music, and I'm a strong believer that uniqueness and innovation do exist. I'll never be that guy who says like, oh, everything's been written before. And, we're all radically different personalities from each other, so even if we're asked to do the same thing, it's going to sound different. Originality, I think, is in the eye of the beholder or the ear of the listener or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I did a tweet about this, I don't know, that kind of blew up a little bit just recently, of just, when I was starting out in the industry, like, there was such this weird pressure of, being that kind of composer that can do everything, and that, like, you need to, write to spec and be able to, nail all of these different genres, and, like, here's the horror mystery sound, or, like, here's all of these things, and here's all the tools to make them. And it's just this kind of weird vibe for me of, like, I don't know if that's what I want to do, and just kind of recoiling from that, because, I went to straight out of college, I went to GDC, 2006, 2007, and met a whole bunch of amazing composers, Will included, and we kind of we're all kind of like coming into the industry and kind of trying to figure out like what was our place in it. And at the time I had no idea like what my place actually was. And the second year that I was in GDC, like there was this thing that a lot of composers go to, is the gang sort of the Game Audio Network Guild what was it, the Demo Derby.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that was always like the hugest pressure for me, like especially coming out of college and like got to show my stuff, right? I gotta make an impact or something. And the first year I was just kind of like, here's some tunes that I wrote, and it was just kind of like, I don't really feel these a whole lot. And but the second year I was just not going to do it at all. And I was rooming with another composer friend, and was just playing some like piano tunes that I wrote just on my laptop. And I wasn't planning on like going to the demo derby or anything. And he said, like, this piano track that you wrote is really beautiful. Like, you should play that. And so I went there, and I just, here's this, piano piece that I wrote. And, everyone's just kind of playing their demo reels and stuff. And I played that, and it was such a different thing that everyone on the panel, like, was just kind of like, oh, just kind of like, and then I realized, like, maybe that's kind of where my voice can go. Like, maybe that's something that I can actually bring to game music. And it's kind of, I guess, not ironic, but just like it makes sense that the first thing that kind of actually did blow up for me was Celeste, which was that very sort of personal piano vibe that I initially kind of brought in 2007 and just held on to until now. So that was something that I really reflected with. Yeah.
mean, is it possible if you do something that's like, if you're always searching for something that hasn't been done before and it's too, like, can it be too original and almost distracting from what's, like, you're still writing for something also, like, you're not trying to distract from what's going on.
Well, when I say that, I do mean in the context of video game music.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, like, yeah, there's like all the music in the world out there, but sometimes there's elements that just haven't really been used in a certain way. And that's, I think, what's kind of so beautiful about writing to picture is that, you know, have there been pieces for organ, let's say? Yes, of course, like hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But have you ever heard the organ used in like a space fantasy time travel weird thing? Like, no, and that's the brilliance of Hans Zimmer on the Interstellar score.
Yeah, it's bringing all of those inspirations, you know, from the entire world of music into a context that, you know, especially for film, is like so dominated by just the standard orchestral sound, right? And for video games, like, I feel as they've gotten bigger, as AAA has kind of exploded in a lot of ways, like, we've kind of tried to emulate that big Hollywood sound of like, here's the standard thing that you're used to hearing. And so, like, there's so many opportunities to bring new things into that and to make that stand out. And like, you know, no, we're still, you know, video games, we're still innovating in interesting ways. Like, we have a history here, and to bring that to video game scores as well, I think is so strong.
Yeah, a few MAGFests ago, I went to a panel that Alex was hosting, and I forget exactly what the context was, but it kind of made me think about the contour of how game music has evolved over the, you know, last several generations. And this is only my personal theory, but like, I feel as though, you know, PlayStation 1 and Super Nintendo and before that, we had a certain sound that was almost like required because, you know, technical limitations, and almost maybe as a result of it, or maybe because the standards hadn't really been written in stone yet. But you did have quite a bit of diversity in the music, and there was a time, I would say like mid PS2, early PS3, where it did generally gravitate towards that, you know, cinematic kind of thing. And I think that was sort of when we were starting in the industry, and people would very much recommend, like, oh, you have to be able to write anything, and you have to, you know, you have to do this like cinematic, orchestral, you know, whatever. And I really think that now we're kind of going back to that originality, except with all the tools that you could ever possibly want. And so we can, what's nice about that is we can have scores like Cuphead, which are completely different from what you would ever expect, but work incredibly well. You know, you can have that jazz score, you can have that electronic score that's like, you know, building upon the chiptune style. Do you want to?
Frank Klepacki, ladies and gentlemen.
What's happening?
Go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know. Yeah, why are you here? Like, have you worked on any video games?
A few. I actually just got here from soundcheck for tonight's performance with myself and the Tiberian Sons, so hope to see all of you there. Main stage at 10:30 tonight. But yeah, so my name's Frank Klepacki, and if you're not familiar with my work, most known for the Command & Conquer series, and worked on a host of other games, The Lion King, Blade Runner, Star Wars Empire at War, just to name a few, and currently working on a new Conan title, so fun stuff. How's it going?
Awesome. And I'm sorry, Will, did you want to like finish whatever, or did you finish up?
Well, yeah,
what you were
my
saying?
point was that, like, I think we are entering an era now where you're not really asked to, you know, do any standards, but instead they're looking for those unique voices and interesting concepts, and I think that's generally where we're heading towards.
Cool.
Somebody had asked you
I'm
a
sorry, go
question
ahead,
last
Chris.
night, Alex, at your panel about like what's the next, you know, what are we allowed, I don't remember the context of the question, but like what's going to be the next style, or what are we allowed to do? And it was kind of, you know, like there's not really like boundaries in that sense. Yeah.
Right. The limitations are off, and as a result, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm sort of in writer's block. I'm shifting gears a bit. As a matter of fact, I think Frank and I, we had some discussion of this, like, you know, at this show on this subject, work-life balance. So, like, yeah, we're all going, ah. So yeah, I mean, I have 3 boys, a wife and 3 boys, and you know, I'm always, considering, struggling, figuring stuff out about like, okay, what is life? What is like, there's the work that I do, and yeah, that's a part of it. Or, there's time with family, there's time with friends, and everything that we all have considerations for. And I've heard some people describe there's composers that are the reason that they're so successful is because all they do is their work, but they totally love it. Dale North is a really good example of that, but I know he just he started fairly recently, and he's just on fire, and he's working on a ton of cool things. So yes, what are your the things that you consider with work-life balance, and techniques or advice on that front?
I would say the work-life balance has been very important to myself, in particular through my whole career, and I've been very fortunate enough to work with companies that have understood that. Not every company has that frame of mind and are content to just crunch everybody for months to get things done. And I think that if there's better management in place, that doesn't need to happen. And if people don't constantly redirect projects, that's another big part of it as well. So it's finding, occasionally you're going to have a push that you need to get a deadline done, with a team. As a composer, personally, though, I find that, time management efficiency is key to getting things done, not only the way that you want to get them done, but in a way that also meets everybody's criteria. And you just have to designate, time in your day that for sure you're going to be focused and working on this stuff. And just stay that way. Like, don't deviate. Don't start, looking at social media or checking your phone or, making calls and getting distracted. Getting distracted is the worst enemy, and it's so easy to do in today's day and age. I mean, there's so much that can just easily, switch your frame of mind. So you just have to shut your cell phone off, stay in your DAW, and start just composing and getting as many ideas out as possible, getting as many tracks done as possible, and then that way you can be sure that you're on track for time management efficiency.
I'm probably the worst person at this table in terms of work-life balance, but I will say
Tried
this.
not to look at you while I was asking that question.
Yeah, I will say this, I love my work. I really love working, especially on the projects I'm working on now. And there is that danger of, you're so into it that, you want to spend 2 full days just working out this amazing synth sound. Ooh, look at this, and it's hardware and so. Even with those temptations, though, I do believe in what you might call core hours, where you're able to just say, okay, I've analyzed my work process, and I know that if I work during this particular time, I'll get a ton of stuff done. I won't be distracted. For me personally, that's really, really late in the evening, literally midnight to about 4 or 5 a.m.
Wow.
So yeah, I have had to shift my schedule, but I never get interrupted. No one's emails are pinging off, and social media and the world outside is pretty quiet.
That's the best time, is when everyone else is just not even existing online.
Yeah, everyone shuts up, and then I can get my stuff done.
But I think 2 things for me as far as my own pro tips, I guess, and this is all just very specific to my own, I guess, my weird career path and the way that I've sort of taken writing on music, or writing music. The first one was to actually make music my full-time thing. And that's obviously not an option for everyone that's starting out, but literally 2018 was the first year that I was actually a full-time composer. Everything else that I've done, I was working as a full-time designer in the AAA game space, and so I was working at ArenaNet, I was working at Ubisoft, and just doing my day job, and then weekends and evenings and stuff were when I was actually writing music. And work-life balance-wise, that is pretty much work constantly. But now, in this past year, I've felt like I've actually been able to have a better percentage of my time to actually just kind of exist outside of work.
Did you write Heart of Thrones in-house at ArenaNet, or did you write it at home?
So it was a thing where I was basically splitting my time, where during the development of Heart of Thorns, I was working 4 days a week as a designer, and doing level design story design stuff for the campaign, and then Fridays I was a composer and I worked from home. So it's kind of a special arrangement that I worked out with both the audio team and the design team to kind of let me do that. because I wanted to actually get paid on the schedule that I was working on and not just expanding my hours. And so the second important thing was realizing that a workday is not just what I spend at my computer, and even doing things like running errands, I am also kind of working because I'm running ideas through my head, and I feel like when I'm taking a walk, if I'm doing something else, that's actually like the best time for me to reflect on the ideas that I have and the ones that I've already put down in my computer and or on paper or whatever I've done. I'm running those ideas through my head and like thinking of ways to augment them, to arrange them into different ways. And that's also work time, and that's allowing myself to step away and continue to work, but also be able to do other things, and realizing that's also kind of part of my work hours.
When I was doing my undergrad, it was it's common to just over practice. I was practicing 8-10 hours a day for like 4 years, and I realize now as I'm older, like how much of that was wasted time in a sense. Like you sort of hit this wall and you always try and power through it, and you don't realize that you're actually like not only accomplishing nothing, you're probably actually going backwards. So as I get older, and I noticed this when I was writing for Cuphead, like it was a super intensive process, but I was pretty prone to burnout when I was in my undergrad. I didn't realize it though, and as I get older, I realize when I'm sort of hitting a wall with writing, practicing, anything like that, and I'm a lot more fine now with giving myself permission to take a break, which I think is early on in careers, that's maybe like you see these deadlines, and it's a tough thing to sort of step away from and allow yourself to like stop thinking about that for a bit. Yeah, I don't know if anyone, but like permission to not be working is it's okay to give yourself sometimes.
Yeah. Sure.
And it's different from being lazy. Like that's not the same as being lazy. It's like you've done the work, now take a break.
Yeah.
I think there's such a thing as taking things just too seriously. I mean, at the end of the day, we're writing music for little games for children. It's like not the most serious thing in the world, and you can just overthink like crazy, and that can be a huge time waste when you're just like just stopping yourself from doing what's natural. And sometimes it's nice to just go out, take a walk, walk around the park if you're anywhere near something like that, and just kind of run the ideas in your head where it's much quicker than anything you could possibly do on a keyboard or DAW or anything like that.
And just a quick anecdote to piggyback on what you were saying about giving yourself permission to step away. One way to do that is to actually put it on your calendar. This is something I've actually done a lot in the last several years, which was okay, besides obvious things like family, birthdays, anniversaries, whatever, like pencil in date nights, pencil in friend nights, pencil in game nights. Just book that for yourself, like the way you would schedule work, but do it for fun stuff too. That way you're guaranteed to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna do game night that night, cool. And then you look forward to it and you have that break that you need because you've actually scheduled it and made time for it.
I think if you're really into a project you're working on too, like you're sort of still always thinking about it, and like on those break nights or when you're playing a game with friends or something, you might come up with one of your best ideas. Yeah. Like that's also when they come, when you're not really trying to force them. So you're not, even then, you're probably also, if you're knee deep in some sort of great project you're working on, you're never really too far away from it, I don't think either.
You say eureka. I'm going to piggyback on what you said. Also, in that first of all, like I do what you're talking about with the scheduling. Like on Google Calendar, I've got like all these blocks, and they're all assigned to various things. They could be business, or they could be family or personal. And then sometimes, if you schedule a personal night, or a night with friends, and then you find yourself like getting nuts. The thing that I was going to add to that is to just forgive yourself for also being flexible with your breaks, right? Like it's just another addendum to being able to say, I just don't feel like going out tonight, and I'm going to stay home and watch Netflix. And oh my God, I keep quoting John Mulaney, but he's just like, it feels so much better to not do something usually, than to do something. Although there's a flip side to that, in which like when you do something, you find that you enjoyed it, but it's exhausting, et cetera, et cetera. The flexibility also goes towards like, I really think what you said was cool about the midnight to 4 a.m. stretch and the creative, the juices are really flowing at that point better usually than any other part of the day, because I find that's true for myself as well. But I have to get up at 6 in order to get the kids to school. But having said that, they're having a crazy, all over the place ADD mind, which I believe everybody has like that. Either it's very little, or it's a lot, or it's on a certain sliding scale. That if you're not getting the productivity stuff done because you have that, that dedication in mind, but also just the passion for whatever it is, and it could be business based or it could be otherwise. Like if I find myself even thinking about YouTube or Facebook, like I have to switch gears, because those are the biggest black holes in the universe, where you're just like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden it's 2 hours later and I didn't get the thing done that I was supposed to, and what? It's like, how could I have done that? And it's amazing the distractions that you were talking about that can be there, that you really have to you do have to discipline yourself on that. But that's where the flexibility comes. It's like, okay, if I'm not being productive here, let's be productive in another spot. Cool. How long does this thing run for? Do we go till 12:30? Is that right? Okay. So I'd like the opportunity for people to engage with specific composers on this panel, potentially. What? 12:30. Thanks, Penelope. Cool. All right. Yeah. So we have like 19 minutes or whatever it is, and so I don't know if we have like front mics, or somebody can stand up and like I'll repeat whatever the question is if you can speak up. So okay. Yeah, however we can set that up. I also want to be able to give people time to do. Oh, okay. Wireless mic, sweet. Got it ready.
I will say at Alex's panel last night, I found myself, he was talking about everything he had done, and I found myself getting anxious because I haven't written anything for a couple of days. And I was already kind of like, I gotta get back to work.
Yeah, and I haven't gotten back to my studio since the holidays, so I'm just like, I want to write things. So I've seen Spider-Verse like twice since I took a break, and I'm just like, every single time I see it, I'm just like, that movie has such an amazing soundtrack.
It's cool. It's the same composer as Little Big Planet.
Yeah.
Daniel Pemberton is his name?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to start questions?
Yeah,
Okay, so
somebody can raise their hand, and we'll just pass the mic back and forth. So anybody that's got the first question? Oh, right there. Yeah, cool.
Stuff he's been showing on his Twitter has been so fucking cool. Thank you. Behind the scenes.
Hey there. So I know two of you are the Guild Wars 2 composers, and I was kind of curious because you both came onto that project working on the prior work of Jeremy Soule and McLean Dimer. And how did you go into that? And I mean, did you have to listen to the tracks that they had done and kind of identify how you could make something that had continuity, or what? Like, how did you make something that felt like it was part of the same soundtrack?
Sure. I think it was an interesting thing where, like, after we released Guild Wars 2, because Jeremy obviously did the music for the base game, and then McLean, who was one of the sound designers at Guild Wars at ArenaNet, sort of took up the mantle of writing additional music, and I kind of joined in where I could, and McLean kind of was forced with most of the pressure of sort of that continuity and sort of bridging the gap, because there's definitely a very Jeremy Soule has a very strong style. It's a very specific sort of thing, and so obviously you want to keep things in the same universe. And I think Will, you've had the experience of working on a lot of different franchises that have sort of had an established sound, and so I'm sure you can speak to that as well. But it kind of really comes down to taking what that sound is, and then also kind of finding a way to sort of bring your own voice into it as well, without straying too far, but still being able to do interesting things with it. And I think since I was a augmented composer to the main one for Guild Wars 2, I had more of free reign to kind of here's the weirder stuff that maybe isn't sort of the core tracks, but I can go off and write something with this rhythmic guitar part or something, instead of just full orchestra with amazing woodwind soloists or whatever.
Yeah, for me it was kind of weird because I did so I was on Path of Fire. And literally I got an email from McLean at the last possible second, and he said, I don't feel like writing the action music. Could you literally just write Lara Croft again? and make it sound like kind of Guild Warsy. And I'm like, all right, sure. And he's like, great. You have a month, and it's like 30 minutes or something ridiculous. And I was already working on Call of Duty at the time, so that was awesome. And so for me, all I really did was, I understood he liked that Lara Croft stuff, and I just kind of Guild Warsified it by adding a little bit of male choir and just a little bit more epic and more sort of slow and grandiose to get that fantasy vibe. But honestly, Guild Wars is such a big universe that it didn't feel restrictive at all.
Yeah.
It seemed almost like you basically do anything. They're very precise about lyrics. So they wanted, when we were using choir lyrics, it had to be somewhat accurate Latin. Bungie, by the way, is way worse. You had to have correct grammar, syntax, all the Latin had to be perfect for that, because Sky Lewin, the music director, is an actual, he actually speaks Latin, so it's crap, But yeah, I mean, when you're going into these new these established franchises as a new composer, it is good to do some research and reconnaissance, but you also kind of have to remember they hired you for a reason.
Yeah.
And these are very expensive decisions that they make to hire you, so it's best to kind of stick to what they probably hired you for, and just kind of expand on that and play in your own sandbox. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that sense of trust, right? They have extended this invitation for you to sort of bring your expertise, and if they know what they're doing, that's them showing their trust in your style and everything that you've sort of done to this point, and to sort of bring your voice to that. And I think that's always a fun thing, especially giving those opportunities.
Yeah.
Cool. Got another question?
Okay, let's go over here.
Hi. So there are songs that I've written that, listening back now, I don't even really care to listen to anymore. I was wondering if there are any tracks in your repertoire that you're not even a fan of anymore.
Anybody?
Are there tracks that we've written that we're not into anymore?
You're just not into anymore, and why do you think that is, maybe?
There are tunes on Cuphead I'm not even into anymore, and that's not even that old. Sorry.
I hate everything I wrote for Star Wars: The Old Republic. I know I'm not allowed to say that, and I hope this doesn't go on the internet, but I just don't like it anymore. I hate it all.
I mean, I tend to look back at things as just, I recognize the growth process of what happened in the career, so I don't frown upon necessarily anything I've done in the past, but there are certain projects that I wish could have been better, that I worked on because of time constraints or technical limitations. I remember I worked on a title on the TurboGrafx system back in the day, and it was just so wonky in its playback, and I could never get the tempos to play the same every time. It kept changing them for no reason.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what the? So that was frustrating. And then another project I worked on that I enjoyed but felt really rushed was a project called Nox in the late 90s, and it was a great fantasy type of game, and they just kind of waited till the very last minute to ask for music, and they're like, you got 2 months to do an entire soundtrack for this game, go. And I'm like, okay, and
That never happens.
Yeah, right.
while I'm working on 2 others simultaneously.
Of course.
So it was one of those things where I felt like I really just didn't do as good a job as I could have, but everybody responded favorably to it, so it worked out.
Yeah, I think for me, the main things that sort of factor into listenability to old tracks of mine is just I've gotten a lot better at production quality over the years, and so I'll go back to something that I wrote Dead State or something, and I'm just I really should have mixed that better, or the samples that I used there were kind of crap, and it's just what I had on hand, and I wish I could go back and sort of remaster these old soundtracks despite no one really caring if I did.
I think if you're always trying to do the best that you can, then you can at the very least look back on old things and know that was a different point in your growth process too, and that was the best I could have done at that time. You can't really get too, if you totally bluffed a project off or something, then there's maybe a bit more of a reason to be well, I probably could have done better, but yeah.
Cool. Another one? Everybody say thanks to Penelope for running that microphone all over the room.
Hey guys.
Patrick!
Oh, hi. Wow, call me out, why don't you? I guess going off for what Chris said earlier, where you can sometimes find inspiration for your music during your downtime period. I was wondering if there are any, this question is for everyone, by the way, but I was wondering if there are any specific examples where in your downtime or in a random ass moment, something just kind of clicked for you on one of your pieces.
I don't know, like a very specific example for me is like I wrote the main Celeste theme while I was taking a shower. So, so I was just taking a shower and just like kind of, oh shit, okay, this is good. and then like, you know, I was just like, this is it. This is the melody. And I was just like, you know, still had to shampoo and stuff. And so I was just like, you know, trying to keep I just had to sing it over and over and over to myself, like while I was like, you know, as soon as I possibly could, I just ran down and like, you know, just wrote it out on a piano or something. And
Can I offer a suggestion? I have waterproof Post-it notes that I keep in the shower. I'm not kidding. It's like a whole thing of and I've written so much music for pretty much every project, you know, just in the shower, and I just, you know, write on the wall and then take these soggy, kind of nasty, filmy things into the studio, let it dry off a little bit. That, and I also keep a sketchbook. It's just a music notation sketchbook, and I, you know, wherever I happen to be, just in case, you know, something comes to me.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer. I mean, yeah, I work a lot, but I'm a firm believer in just getting out of the studio whenever possible.
Yeah.
Because you know, it changes your perspective entirely. You might come up with something that you never would have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to just add to that, yeah, you don't get to choose when good ideas come to you. That's the thing. So you just have to accept the fact that you could be working or you could not be working, and you could be trying to go to sleep, and all of a sudden the genius thing hits you and you're like, I can't go to sleep now. And then you have to get it out. At least get the idea down. That's the thing. You don't have to all of a sudden just do the whole song. I mean, but, you know, yeah, exactly. Notate it, or use your cell phone, just make a note, or even record your voice just singing the melody or lyrics or whatever it is that you have, and just get it out and get back to it, and you'll remember and you'll be able to finish it.
Cool. Yeah, I think we've got time for one or two more. Oh, so one in back, but then we'll take yours after that. Hopefully we'll have time. Yeah.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier about external distractions like YouTube and your...
Hold the mic a little closer.
Oh, yeah, so external distractions you mentioned earlier about like YouTube or phones and whatnot. Do you find that, I find personally that I get a lot of internal distractions as well. So while I'm working on a track, I'll end up going on a tangent. And I'm wondering, do you guys allow yourselves to explore those tangents? Because for me, that's where a lot of my best work actually ends up coming from.
yeah. Oh,
What could you explain what you mean by the tangent? Sorry, I didn't quite
So
understand.
it's just like you're working on a musical idea, and with that same like maybe set of information, you come up with something that's not what you were actually working on, but just a different idea, right? With the same maybe instruments or whatever.
I'll start that one off real quick.
Not necessarily frustrations, you just get inspired by just the process.
yeah.
So yeah, my tracks never usually have a standard form, like, or traditional form that you might learn about in theory. Like they do have to be structured in such a way so that they're not completely schizophrenic, but they usually, they usually go in many different directions, or they will, you know, like, and I'll usually think, okay, if I want to be more dynamic, or more, whether it's melodically dynamic or actually, you know, level-wise dynamic, then I make sure that I incorporate that at certain points where I feel that that might be appropriate. Other than that, I let it go where it goes. Like, I love to just, and it feels right usually to have that happen. Now, after that, the hard part comes where you have to like make sure that it, you know, like the layers are correct and the instrumentation really sounds nice and full where it needs to, and you know, you got to do your mixing and your mastering and like all of that stuff and the hard work that you don't want to do because you're just writing music, right? And it feels really good to do that. Nobody likes to necessarily do that last 10% that really takes the piece where it needs to go. But yeah, that's kind of how I write. Period. Is it goes where it needs to.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was working on Celeste, I was actually kept something in my head that Will brought up one time at a presentation where you were talking about writing basically in the whole score in one project file.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that I ended up doing as just kind of like a result of thinking about that and also working on a bunch of like dynamic bits for Celeste was I actually kind of found myself going on a tangent with an idea, and I just kind of went ahead like 6 minutes in and just like started like, doing something else, and then kind of going back, and like, so there's like 3 different pieces for, one track or whatever that are just like all in a different, in the same project file. And I do a lot of save as sometimes if I'm like getting into a tangent. And so I'm just like, okay, here's this development of the idea. I still have the other one that I already worked on. It's terrible for project management because it's just disorganized, and I have like a file that's called like Battle Line Fight Final or something, and it's not actually the final boss fight. It's like her theme, but then I went on a tangent and did something else with it. I don't know. It's terrible, but I've somehow managed to remind myself what those files are called.
A good idea is a good idea. Maybe it's not good for this song, but that's why I really am a strong believer in like sketching on paper first before I do anything on the computer, because that way, if I do go on a tangent or whatever, by the time I get to the computer, I've worked out exactly what I want for this particular piece, and then for other tangents that may have happened, it can just be used for something else.
Yeah.
Okay. You're good to go. Great.
So as a composer, how do you struggle, or how do you deal with the struggle of conveying a musical idea to someone who isn't musical, especially someone who's maybe a boss, or like someone who's, we get super excited about little nuanced things and new theory aspects and stuff. And then the opposite of that is, how do you deal with that energy and that excitement in the everyday world when many people that you might talk to don't understand that nuance? And what do you do with that energy? Do you have a community of composers that you are with? You were talking about gang and things like that, but how do you deal with being kind of almost a lone person in a sea of things that everybody else connects with, and you overall, you might be the single person that's in your own head? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes. All right, I guess I'll start. Yeah, that makes total sense. And what it is, it's a communication/language barrier, because we're familiar with certain terminology and emotional context from our point of view as composers, and someone who is not musically inclined doesn't speak that language. So then you have to try to translate that into something that they might have a reference to, which is helpful. So, if they don't understand what you're saying, well, you have to cite that it's kind of like this, and give them that specific example to listen to, so that they can compare and say, okay, I see what you mean, and a lot of times when I was working on things, the president of Westwood was not musically inclined, but he would come to me and just say, I want something new, I want something fresh, and I want something that's, he would give me like ideas of elements because he had an eclectic taste in music, and I had to think to myself, okay, does he literally want me to translate this thing that he's pointing out, or does he just want something from that specific? So that was a challenge, and it took me a while to figure that out. But once I did, I understood that it's more about a feeling, for someone who isn't musically inclined. It's more about, what makes that feeling? Is it the instrumentation? Is it the tempo? Is it the effects on it? Those are the things that you have to try to pinpoint and ask some questions about, and then hopefully you can get in the right direction from that.
Yeah, I think like the strongest like skill that I've developed over like working on music for things is to be able to translate the feedback that people give you, and like it's never an exact thing. Like it's never going to be like this lines up to this perfectly, but kind of, it's that skill of taking feedback from any sort of thing, and like what are they actually talking about? Like, what is the actual, thing that you can change about this that will sort of generate the response that they want, and it's really challenging. It's probably the hardest part of the job, is to really kind of take that feedback and know exactly sort of what they want out of that. But then like communicating those things, I feel like I always try to show by example as much as possible, like being able to just very quickly kind of play something that can be sort of a range of choices to present and be like, is this kind of more like what you're going for, and not, trying to give like the entire like change all at once, but just, sample a little bit just to be like, is this it? Okay, yeah, cool. And then sort of proceed from there.
Yeah, it's something that you almost kind of relearn every time when you have a new director or whoever is calling the shots and asking for these revisions. Everyone has their way, everyone has their own vocabulary, and sometimes they say the literal exact opposite of what they actually mean. And you just have to eventually figure out on a case-by-case basis how to translate from that particular director.
Can you make that sound a little more green, please?
I mean, I've heard other people mention this too, but it's like the director will ask for something and they don't really know what they want. You sort of have to tell them what they want and show them what they're asking for. Yeah. Even if they have a specific thing, if you say, I think this is going to be what's right for this, then that might click in their mind, like, oh yeah, that's maybe more what. And on Cuphead, like, we didn't know. Like, I was trying to convey, because I knew how the big band was going to sound, but the MIDI mock-ups didn't do really any justice to anything because there's no rhythm section. And until they showed up at the first recording session, they were it's not that they weren't sold, but they were so busy with other things that they were like, we can't really be too concerned about this. But it's only until they showed up at the sessions when they heard the full big band, they were like, okay, we understand the sound of this now. Yeah. And then they were sort of sold on that idea.
Yeah.
Chris, can I ask, did you use any kind of like temp or reference tracks? Like, did they say like, oh, this kind of style or anything like that?
Oh yeah, they did their own. Even before I was brought on the project, they did a lot of their own research, and they wanted less cartoon music, but they sent me like really obvious, like Sing Sing Sing, and Minnie the Moocher, and like, if you like type in 30s Big Band, like whatever, the first 5 YouTube tracks that come up, they were the things they sent me. But that's what the vibe that they wanted too. Yeah. But then it's tough with that particular, because I wasn't doing it in MIDI. Like, I just would send them the Sibelius mock-ups of the melodic parts, and they couldn't, they had a hard time translating that early on. So it was kind of like, that was like, I'm telling you this is going to sound good. You got to trust,
Awesome.
Yeah.
We have to wrap things up, everybody. So I want to say thank you to all the composers on this panel for participating today, and I want to thank everybody here for coming. I believe there's a signing thing immediately after this.
A half hour after.
Half an hour after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be. Is it like downstairs?
It's down next to registration, like behind registration.
Behind
sort of
registration.
areas,
Right.
yeah.
So if you want any autographs from these fine folks, definitely head down in that direction. And
I'm going to plug Doug Perry and I are running. I think Doug's back there. We're running the jam space at 3 to 5. If you guys want to come and jam too, it should be fun. Doug is fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.